Invicta Pro Diver, aka the $100 Rolex. This watch is a Rolex Submariner homage. Is it good or is it bad? This watch generates massive debate and divided opinions amongst watch collectors. Some people swearing by them and others saying it's only fit for the bin. Invicta is actually new to me and I don't know much about them, so let's take one apart and see exactly how good or bad they are. Good day and welcome to JSG Watches. My name's Justin and this channel is all about watch restorations and watch repair. This video being a little bit different to my usual stuff actually, as today we have a brand new Invicta Pro Diver on the bench, fresh out the box. So I've been reading a lot about Invicta online and this particular model actually come up for just shy of $60 US. And for that price I couldn't pass up getting one and just seeing exactly what these things have got to offer. Whilst I get into dismantling this thing, let's discover who Invicta are and what they're about. We can then get into the details of the watch during the reassembly, but first and foremost, let's get into Invicta. So who are Invicta? Who are you? And where are you from? A little bit of digging online and trawling through some forums. To summarise, Invicta first founded in the early 1800s, making mechanical watches from La Chaux-de-Fonds in Switzerland. So the origins of Invicta actually do come from Switzerland. Them making the claim that originally they were a Swiss watchmaker is legitimate. You can actually see from their logo, I think that's a Swiss cross in the middle of the emblem. However, during the 1970s and the Quartz Revolution, like many other watch brands, Invicta struggled to compete and stay afloat. So bad, in fact, that actually they went bankrupt in the early 80s and Invicta was actually sold off. The original sell-off didn't manage to keep the brand alive until the early 1990s when some American owners acquired Invicta. But when they acquired Invicta, they changed the way Invicta operated. So instead of making everything in-house, the new owners opted for a different tactic, focusing only on designing the case and the dials, but outsourcing the manufacture of everything just to keep the cost down and using third-party movements. This particular watch has an unbranded Seiko NH35a movement with the Invicta branding painted onto it. So on the rotor we saw it had sort of the yellow Invicta branding, but for all intents and purposes, this is an unbranded Seiko. It's used in a few other watches. It's not just used in Invicta. But up until now, everything sounds quite honest and it sounds like they have a good track record. But that part about the outsourcing and nothing being made in-house is where the gremlins and the problems start. So having another dig around at some reviews and some of the most common complaints, most people when they get an Invicta, they seem to complain about common things, being the dial details being printed off center, bezel misalignment so the bezel marker doesn't stop at 12, magnifying date window misaligned to the date wheel, reserve power of the mainspring doesn't hold, or the case or the bracelet or the clasp just falling apart as little as a few months of wear. But I guess because if you outsource and you get your things manufactured in many different places, quality control maybe not the best, and maybe when it comes out of some manufacturer plants it might be okay, but others maybe don't hold the same standards. So I can't guarantee that, but maybe that's where the issues lie. But adding on to that, it's not all bad online. Some people seem to rave about them and some people praise them. The most common things, again, looking at reviews, most people that do praise first and foremost the price point of this watch, which I would agree. Being able to get one of these watches for under $60, just shy of $60 US. For that $60, you get a very reliable movement. So this one does have the unbranded Seiko, as mentioned, the NH35a. And when you do get it, the packaging of the watch, you saw the yellow box, you saw how it was housed around that cushion. It's pretty good for a watch of this price in comparison to watches of similar price. It's pretty well packaged. So if I was to give my own opinion on my first glance of one of these watches, looking at, obviously the movement is outsourced by a third party, but looking at what Invicta actually designed, the case, the dial, the hands, the bracelet, the clasp, I'm pretty impressed. I didn't expect much based on the cost of the watch. So I'm impressed, and to elaborate, to put it into perspective, if you wanted to buy just the movement alone, that is how this watch has, that would set you back around, the cheapest I've found, these movements going for is somewhere in the region of $42 US. That means if I got this watch for just under $60, Invicta are able to design, provide the case, the glass, the bezel, the bracelet, the dial, the hands and the packaging for around $18 US. $18 US. That's less than a round of drinks for you and your friends. That's a very low price, so I wasn't expecting much, but it far outshines the price that you pay. You would never hold this thing in your hand and say that's $18 worth of a case. They've done a good job. So initial thoughts from me, from someone that doesn't really know Invicta or didn't know previously, not so bad. I was pleasantly surprised. But this is all based on initial looks. I should probably do more of a rugged stress test to ensure the case can survive and confirm Invicta's claims of, it even claims up to 200 meters of water resistance. Personally, I think that exhibition case back probably doesn't look like it's up to the task, but I could be wrong. As an engineer, I know that every 10 meters of depth in water puts around an additional atmosphere of pressure on the watch. So we're talking 200 meters, that's 20 bar of pressure to survive. I would have thought to survive that, you'd probably need a solid metal case back, but I'm sure Invicta have done their testing. A pressure chamber would be a good test to do on this watch actually. So if anyone has one, give me a shout. Maybe we can make it happen and put that 200 meter water resistance claim to the test. As for the movement, stripping it down now, it is very Seiko. It is very well built. It looks very Seiko. The finish, the parts, the layout, very Seiko indeed. There are some plastic wheels in this movement and I'm guessing that's to keep the cost down, but overall the movement is nice, the movement's good. So looking at the tech specs of the movement itself, this is an automatic movement, meaning it self-winds and powers itself when you wear it. So you see the rotor on the back, that's what's going to turn around, and that rotation of the rotor, that is what's going to power the mainspring. So this will move when you wear it, when you swing your arm, which will automatically wind the watch. But it also comes with manual winding capability. So you can also rotate the crown to power the mainspring as well, which is a good function. Another thing this movement has is hacking capabilities. So that's where you can pull the crown out and stop the seconds hand from moving. So this, why would you need this? This allows you to sync the watch to another watch to the exact second. So historically, this has been used for things like navigation purposes on board ships, where crew may hack their watches and set their watches to match the ship's onboard chronometer. Not sure if this is too used nowadays. If it is, please let us know in the comments section below. Do any of you guys use hacking functions on your watches today? Another good thing about this watch is it's a screw down crown, which is a nice feature for the improved water resistance. It also has a quick set function for the date disc, enabling you to quickly set the date instead of having to wind the crown around until you reach the desired date. So if you need your watch to go forward 10 days, you can quick set the date disc to go forward 10 days. It also comes with a big bracelet, big enough to fit around a wrestler's neck, I think. I have an 8¼ inch wrist, so finding decent straps for larger wrists can be a bit of a challenge, but this is the first watch I've seen where I've needed to take out, say, 4 or 5 whole links just to make sure that it would fit. So for the gents with wrists on the larger size, this watch isn't going to give you any problems. One thing we can see on the main plate of this movement is a lot of these machining marks. So it's not, it's not a bad thing. It just goes to show the sort of the care and the tolerances in the machining process when they go and make these plates. So this one probably not made in small volumes. This highly likely, based on the way it looks, mass produced, and they're probably making thousands per day. But there we have it, disassembly complete. Time to get this thing into the cleaner and get everything looking nice and shiny. And then we can move on to the reassembly, where we can really inspect and talk about some of the internals of this watch. Whilst I prepare everything to run through the cleaner, I'd just like to say a big thank you for everyone following the channel and watching these videos. And if you do like what you see, feel free to subscribe. I've got a few more interesting projects in the pipeline. I've got some Seiko Lordmatics, I've got an Omega Seamaster and a Seiko Bullhead. So if you're interested in any of them watches, feel free to click subscribe just to get the notifications for when them videos go live. So cleaning complete, and now we can start with the reassembly. To start with, we're going to start with the keyless works. The first thing we're installing here is this is called a balance stop lever. So what I mentioned earlier about this watch having hacking capabilities and being able to stop the seconds hand, this is the lever that actually pushes against the balance wheel to stop the seconds hand from moving. And the way that this works is we have the setting lever going in place, and this will engage with that balance stop lever. So when you pull the crown out, if I try and simulate here, when you pull the crown out, it will just move that lever to then rest against the balance wheel, stopping the balance wheel and ultimately stopping the seconds hand. But moving on, we'll install the rest of the keyless works. All of these parts are what allow the watch to, when you pull the crown out, the keyless works allows the watch to switch between the different settings. Typical Swiss made movements have small tiny springs. Some can be an absolute nightmare to work with because they are very small and held under quite a bit of tension. So they're quite difficult to manipulate and move around. Seiko movements being quite unique in the sense that all of their springs are plates. A lot less risk of losing one because they are bigger things to work with, but you just need to be wary that you don't overbend or overstress any of these plates when we install them. So after the keyless works has been done and a bit of grease and a bit of oil has been installed, we can move on to the center wheel. So the center wheel, named the center wheel because it goes in the center of the watch. And this center wheel is held into position with its own bridge as well. Next we have the main barrel going in. So the main barrel is what houses the mainspring of the watch. The mainspring being the part of the watch that stores all of the energy. So when you wind that watch up, what you're doing is you're putting energy into the mainspring, and that mainspring is what slowly releases to enable the watch to run. The trainer wheels typically consisting of 5 wheels. Each of these wheels also have its own unique function. So the first wheel being the main barrel. Then it goes to the center wheel or the second wheel, which rotates once an hour, which drives the minute or the hour hand. Then we have a third wheel, which is just a reduction wheel. The fourth wheel, which turns once per minute, and that then acts as the seconds hand. And then finally the escape wheel. The escape wheel keeping the balance wheel swinging by giving it a small push each time it moves. Moving on, we have the barrel and train wheel bridge. So this bridge, actually, it has some jewels in the top, and what it does is it just sandwiches the train of wheels between the main plate and this bridge, just to hold everything into position. But this bridge this is the ratchet sliding wheel spring, and this is quite fiddly to put in. On the camera, everything shows to be quite large, because I actually use a macro lens to do the filming, but in reality, these are tiny. Some of these components on a watch are deceiving. They're a lot smaller in real life than they look on camera. But also connected to that bridge is part of the automatic works. So we have the first reduction wheel and the pull levers, which is connected to the rotor. So as mentioned earlier when I said that this watch has automatic winding capability, that rotor, when it rotates, goes through some reduction wheels to transfer some power through to the main spring. And the pull lever and the first reduction wheel is part of that mechanism. Once I've oiled and put that back in place, we can get this bridge back onto the watch, and this is where we need to take special care. When we're installing these bridges, we need to make sure that all of the pivots from the train of wheels underneath align and that everything meshes. So when you have the series of wheels from the main barrel all the way through to the escape wheel, you want to make sure that all of the teeth of all of the cogs are meshed correctly, and that all the pivots go through their respective jewels, just so that when we sandwich this plate down and fix everything in position, we don't risk damaging any of the wheels. And one way to do this is, once it's in position, I'm just turning the main barrel, just to make sure if I turn the first wheel in that train of wheels, that the escape wheel, the fifth wheel in that train of wheels, also rotates, just indicating that everything is where it needs to be and that everything is looking okay. And this is a process where it's best to take your time, best not to rush it. And the more you check, every time I put a screw in, I'm just checking before I put it all the way home and tighten everything all the way down. I'm just making sure that everything is where it should be and nothing is misaligned, so nothing can get damaged. But as you saw, I rotated the barrel and everything was looking okay. Everything was looking good. So now we can continue. The most stressful part of a watch installation, the part you need to take the most care with, is that part, just because the pivots on these wheels are fractions of a millimeter in diameter, so they're very easily damaged if mishandled. But thankfully the difficult part out of the way, and now we can resume. Taking a step back though and just having a visual look at this movement, we can see that they have tried to make the bridges look nice with this nice straight graining, just to conceal the rough machining marks underneath, especially as this watch does have that exhibition case back. It just improves the aesthetic. When you look at it visually, that straight grain is definitely an eye catcher. So here I'm just moving the pull lever back into the position where it should be. But these pull lever arms, they are very thin. I'm just being very slow, being very delicate, just to make sure I don't overbend and overstress these arms. Because again, watch components are fragile. This isn't heavy machinery, this is horology. Everything is minute. So you do have to have some delicate hands. But to complete and finish off the delicate part, we have what's called the pallet fork and the pallet bridge. So a pallet fork it looks like a fork and it has two stones on it, two jewels. This is what makes the ticking noise of a watch actually. So when you listen to a watch and you can hear that ticking noise, it's actually the pallet fork jewels slamming and hitting against the escape wheel. So when you hear a watch ticking, this one actually beats at 21,600 times per hour, which is around 6 ticks per second. So if you was to put this watch to your ear, you would hear that ticking noise and it goes around 6 times per second. A time grapher can also give you that, and it will automatically calculate the watch's beat. But getting into the tools of watchmaking, I mean, that could be a whole new video on its own. There are so many tools to try and consider just to get into watchmaking. Yes, you can get a very lean toolkit, but you just need to make sure that some of the things like the screwdrivers and the tweezers especially, you can't settle for the cheap ones. The cheap ones will give you headaches. So you do have to invest just a little bit just to ensure that everything goes smooth if you are looking to get into watchmaking. So the pallet fork does lock the escape wheel, but what we want to make sure is that the friction isn't too high. So I'm using this grease, this special grease, the 9415 grease, and I'm just applying it to the ends of the jewels on the pallet fork. And I'm just gonna flick it over left and right a bit just to distribute that oil. And once that's done, that's actually the tricky part finished. And we can flip this watch back over. And now we can move on to the other side of the keyless works and the calendar works. So first and foremost, being a mechanical watch, there's obviously friction between a lot of the moving parts. And if you want a watch to survive and operate smoothly, you do need to oil and grease some of them parts that are in contact. So when you actually service a watch, this is what you need to service, because some of these oils and greases do dry up over time and they can go tacky and dry. So if you don't service your watch, yes, it might keep good time, but what you're doing is you just might accelerate the wear on some of the components. Yes, short term it might not affect the timing of a watch, but long term it for sure will have some detrimental effect if you do not make sure these oils and greases are maintained. Everything that is meshing and everything that is rotating typically has either a low viscosity, medium viscosity grease, just to help reduce the friction. A good thing about Seiko movements, as mentioned in one of my previous videos, is any Seiko movement you work on, typically you can go online and you can find the service manuals. The service manuals give exploded views of all of the watch parts, as well as it gives you the name of the parts, the part numbers, and also advises what grease to use and where to grease and oil when you do a service. So a very handy sheet actually to use, and I'll link it if anyone's interested in working on one of these watches. I'll leave it in a link below. So going on now, we have the Canon Pinion, and this is friction fit. So I'm going to press it home until I hear a click. And then we have the minute wheel, which controls the minutes. The hour wheel going on next, which controls the hour. And after we have this plastic wheel, and this is actually like a calendar finger. So what this does is this rotates, both of these being plastic. So the white wheel and the black wheel, what they do is they rotate, they will flick the date disc over. And in order to hold that date disc in place and hold it under tension, we actually have a date jumper. This date jumper being a big plate, so it does help cover and span over the calendar works. One, to hold some things in position, but two, to act as a spring for that date disc. The date disc going on now, and as you'll see, I'm just moving this date jumper just to engage with that date disc to hold it down in position. Then just need to take a bit of care to make sure everything is resting and settled before we can move on. Then finally, what we're going to put on top is the date indicator maintaining plate. So this is what holds and pinches everything down. This one held down with 4 screws. But we can see anyone that's worked on Swiss watches, typically in the calendar works and the keyless works, you would find them small springs as mentioned. This movement, everything is held by, the springs are embedded and actually designed within the plates themselves. But doing a quick check, I have found a problem. So I've missed something here, because what should happen here, this should activate the quick set. But currently I don't see it. So I've not done something right. Welcome to watchmaking, guys. This is what happens. So what I would have to do, I've had to disassemble it, break it back down a bit, and what I missed was this tiny metal sprocket, which is actually the date corrector setting transmission wheel. So without that, obviously, as you can imagine, the title of the wheel says it all. It's a date corrector setting transmission wheel. Without that wheel, we have no transmission. So once that's put back in place, everything reassembled, now we have that nice snappy quick set. So this is what enables us to quickly set the date. And if this black wheel rotates, and as you see, once every 24 hours, that black wheel will also flick the day over. Thankfully, back up and running, but welcome to watchmaking. This is something that people will experience, and we all kick ourselves, but we're all human and we do miss things. But we continue. Now we're looking at installing the automatic works. So what we have going on here is we have a second reduction wheel and pinion. So this wheel engages with the ratchet wheel, which engages with the mainspring. So the second reduction wheel, what it does is it's held in position with the pull lever here, and this is part of the automatic works, so it's connected to that main rotor. So when you wear a watch and that rotor can spin over, this is what will rotate this wheel and ultimately power up the mainspring. But as you can imagine, this is not a quick process, and this can take several hours of use, if not all day. But this is just pinched down into position with the automatic train bridge. And we can get the two screws to push this one down into position. One thing to mention on this particular movement is there's a lot of screws on this movement. So if you are to work on this yourself, just take note on all of the screws that come out and where they come from to ensure that when you put it back together, the screws go back to where they come from. But now, let's see, moment of truth. This was a brand new movement, so I'm expecting it to fire back up. Just a little wiggle to set that balance wheel home. Make sure that the pivots are in the jewels. There we have it. This balance wheel being quite nice actually. Some of the old vintage watches, the hairsprings on the balance wheel, they are very fine and they are very delicate. So when you pick the balance cock up, sometimes them springs extend just under the weight of the balance wheel itself by quite a large amount, which is a bit concerning sometimes because you don't want to damage the hairspring. It's the most delicate part of a watch and it's the heart of the watch. But this movement has quite a rigid hairspring, which is just a lot easier and safer to work with. But once that's in, let's just check the timing, and what we get here is a very respectable result. We have 230 degrees of amplitude, minus 3 seconds of rate, so it's losing 3 seconds a day, and a beat error of 0.2 milliseconds. So this movement, as expected, coming from Seiko, is a powerhouse. This is a very, very respectable movement to have in a watch. Now we can get on to, now we know everything is up and running and everything is nicely timed, we can get to putting the dial back on. There's a dial holding spacer that needs to be installed, but this needs to be installed underneath the date disc. So I had to go back and remove it all again, put that dial holding spacer back in, and then reassemble everything, because this watch has a bit of a different method of holding the dial down. Most dials are held down with some pinch screws, But this dial is just held down with this plastic dial holding spacer, and it's just the dial feet wedged into some plastic holes. So not the most sophisticated method of holding a dial down, but equally effective. Whilst I do the final touches on this watch and just put the hands on and get this thing back in the case, a closing summary. What do I think of this Invicta Pro Diver? I would rate it actually. I don't think it's a bad watch at all. I think it's okay. I think if you've not got $10,000 spare to spend on a Rolex, but you like the look of the Submariner, this watch is not horrendous. This watch is actually a very good watch, and you get a lot for your money. You get the Seiko NH35a movement. You get a dial that resembles a Submariner. You get a dial that resembles a Submariner with the indices, the hands, and just the overall look. A case that has a pretty decent finish, which resembles the Submariner. It's quite a nice, chunky, sturdy piece of steel on your wrist. The screw down crown and a nice steel bracelet. I think for $60, you can't complain. No one can complain about this watch for $60. Anyone that's complaining and expecting more, spend more money on a better watch. Don't go expecting to get a Rolex Submariner for $60. But my final remarks, I was pleasantly surprised with this watch, and I as mentioned before, I wasn't expecting much, but this watch actually over-delivered on what I was expecting. So would I recommend an Invicta Pro Diver to anyone out there? Absolutely. Anyone just getting into watches, anyone even contemplating getting a Rolex Submariner, maybe even just wear one of these Invictas just to see if you like it on your wrist. Instead of spending $10,000 to realize you don't actually like it, get one of these, wear it for a week, see what you think. But overall, this thing is quite a tidy watch. I would rate this watch. Not only do I think it looks good, but it also runs extremely well with that movement inside. So I'd just like to say thanks for coming along. Thanks for sticking around and watching this. This one a bit different to what I would usually do, but I appreciate the support. Let me know if you've got any watches that you're interested in reviewing. Maybe I can look to open up and explore any other watches that you're looking to purchase. But I hope you enjoyed what we ran through today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So take care, and I'll see you all real soon.